I think the one message I'd say to any founder or anybody with an idea is don't start a company thinking that your first idea is going to be the one that's going to really kind of fit. You'd be surprised at the amount of companies that start off with one idea and they end up with something completely different.
Every investor wants to see that you have a product that people will pay for. That is so important that you actually get that revenue coming in to validate that there is a value in what you're doing. The proof is in the pudding. If they're willing to pay for it, then there's a value in it. And that's what you as the founder really need to tease out and find that out sooner rather than later.
Good evening, everyone. It's so lovely to see so many of our She Generate program participants with us. It's lovely to see you all again. I'm not normally the host on these events. They will run once every 5-6 weeks, and the team have invited me to host tonight's event. I met Aoife and Jayne both back in 2012, which seems a long time ago now. I met them as they were both exploring the UK market and looking at their expansion plans into new markets. So I was very thrilled to be able to reach out to them both to talk to them this evening about their growing pains and some of the challenges that I talked to them both over coffee many times, and some of the things that they, I suppose, are able to impart with us today of some of the lessons that they've learned along the way. So first up tonight for our quick fireside chat is Jayne. Jayne is the CEO and co-founder of Talivest. Talivest is a global tech company that develops employee engagement solutions. We are very heavily represented in the south west today. Jayne is from Cork and Aoife is from Kerry. So Jayne built Talivest to help companies create a place to work by improving their company culture and holding on to top talent. The company recently and successfully raised 2.5 million with backers, Irish backers such as Anne Herity of CPL, PCH founder Liam Casey, and Brian Meehan, who recently sold his Californian cafe chain Blue Bottle Coffee to Nestle for over 400 million. So some phenomenal backers with Talivest. Jayne has been featured as one of Ireland's top under 30 for 2 years in a row. She is an active ambassador for Every Woman who champions the advancement of women in business and in the hope to close the gender pay gap. So very, very prominent in terms of the startup ecosystem around the world, and very prominent in terms of championing female founders. So you're very welcome, Aoife, or Jayne, sorry. It's lovely to have you with us this evening.
Thank you so much. So delighted to be here, and congratulations on everybody for starting off with Awakenhub. It's a very exciting program, so really happy to be involved.
Excellent. Thank you, Jayne. So Jayne, when we first met, your business had a slightly different proposition than it does now. So I'm going to jump straight in and ask you the question about pivoting and slightly changing the direction of travel and the course of travel for the business. It often feels like a very daunting step to press pause and change the direction of travel. Can you explain what drove that change and what it has meant for your business?
Sure. And it's funny in a way how time flies. And back in 2012, I think I had just graduated from university. And we originally started, or my journey started by doing yearbooks. I originally studied public policy, and I knew I wasn't set out to be a politician, but I always had that, I guess, ambition to keep trying different things. And for some reason, I decided that I wanted to create a yearbook for my university, and that brought me on a whole journey over the last 10 years of pivoting my business 3 times. So you know what they say, third time lucky. I think the one message I'd say to any founder or anybody with an idea is don't start a company thinking that your first idea is going to be the one that's going to really kind of fit. You'd be surprised at the amount of companies that start off with one idea and they end up with something completely different. So for instance, take a company like Stripe. They actually started off with a completely different concept actually altogether, and they ended up with something completely different. So the majority of companies actually start somewhere very, very different. And it's about being resilient and having that confidence to go with the flow. I think where my journey was a little bit unique is I was coming at this as a very naive college student who never worked anywhere else. So I didn't quite understand, I wasn't coming from a situation where I had to take a risk in terms of I didn't have a mortgage or a family at that time. So I just kept, I guess, going after the next opportunity. When something didn't feel right, I wasn't too afraid of trying something a little bit different. As a founder, it can be really scary when you get to a situation where you feel that something's not working, and nobody wants to fail. But sometimes actually failing is more important than succeeding very early on. And that's very easy to say. But I think it's something that every founder should really take on board, that if you're not failing in some shape or form, you're actually not doing it right. Because if it was that easy, everybody would be doing it. But as Denise so kindly gave the introduction, I now run an employee analytics company called Talivest. And again, this did start from that tiny acorn 10 years ago of doing yearbooks, to then doing alumni relations software, to now running the employee analytics company. And I really feel if I didn't go through those early iterations, I wouldn't be where I am now. So I think that's kind of my first piece, is that pivoting is completely normal. At the time, I wish I knew it was more normal than it is now. But it's something to embrace, and don't be afraid that if you start off with one idea and if it changes, that's really good. And that's very, very normal.
And Jayne, on the journey, and now that you're moving forward with the employee analytics and looking at employee engagement solutions for companies, how did you embark on your sales journey and securing that first client? What was the process for you, and what would be your top tips around securing that first client?
Do you know, to be completely honest, it's not easy. It really isn't. And I think we've all been at events where we listen to founders talk about their journey, and it always comes across as if this was an overnight success, and nothing is an overnight success. Again, I came from a public policy background. I'm very dyslexic. I didn't have any sales experience, but I love people, and I loved what I was building. So I think I got quite lucky at the very beginning. And a lot of this is to do with your own skill and your grit. But if you have the ability to be open with people and share what you're building and be open to criticism, that's kind of, for me, I felt got me along the journey with my first customers. What really got me in the door is, again, don't be afraid to pick up the phone or to cold email somebody, or be a bit different, trying to get somebody's attention. So before I built anything, I basically had to set out an objective that, say, I wanted to meet 3 principles. This is going back to the yearbook days. I wasn't selling anything, but I wanted to bring them on the journey to say, I'm building a yearbook company. It's all online. It's really different. You know, if I presented this to you, would you buy this? They might say no, but they might tell me why they wouldn't buy it. And I'd get feedback, and then I'd incorporate that feedback, and then I'd go back and say, so remember the last time we met, you said you wanted A, B, and C. I've now done that. How about now? And again, I got quite lucky at the very beginning, but I meet a lot of founders who have a really good idea. They want to go build a product, and then they want to go sell it. And it actually should be the completely other way around, which sounds a bit funny, but if you have an idea of, you know, building a brand new tech company, and again, you've no idea what you're doing, you just have this idea, you could sell that to the customer and it can be completely wrong. But setting out a small objective to say, I want to meet 2 or 3 potential customers, bring them on the journey. That was something that I used for your yearbook and for Connect Again and Talivest. And I really, really say that to anybody that I speak with that as a founder. It says more to the customer that you listen and that you're actually taking their advice on board. That got us our very first customer. Now, again, there's loads of mistakes that we made along the way, but that is definitely one of the lessons that I did learn, is bring them on the journey.
Yeah, and customer feedback is so important. Even as you say, before you build the product, is obviously making sure that its product market fit is right and ready. That leads me on to my next question really nicely, Jayne. For founders who don't come from a tech background like yourself, and obviously you've built a very successful data company and have built the technology to support that. What advice would you give to them, those founders that are coming from a non-tech background?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I get asked that quite a lot, because even though I run a technology company, I'm actually not the most tech savvy. Funnily enough, I leave that to my brother who works in Apple as an engineer. And it is quite ironic, but again, it comes back to what's your mission, what's your vision. If you can sit in front of somebody and say, here's my idea, here's why I'm building it, and if you can visualize what that is, that's actually sometimes the biggest challenge. Getting somebody to build your product is actually kind of a secondary. We're very lucky that we live in a world where technology is so available, where we have amazing talent, there's amazing grants available. So the ability to, if you can visualize and if you can explain what you want to build and how you want to do it, it's very easy to pick up a company to actually go and build that for you. Your first minimal viable product should be something that you look back on and almost be embarrassed. It's not meant to be picture perfect, your first one. But again, being realistic, some founders I talk to sometimes get quite fearful, say they don't have a co-founder or they don't have a CTO to kind of kick things off. That's okay as well. You'll go through iterations of either working with different companies or different partners. Some will work, some won't work. But at that very beginning of that technology piece, don't get bogged down on it. As long as you can really explain your vision and your product. And the most important thing is why you're building this. That's half the battle.
Oh, fantastic. And obviously, Jayne, now that you're in the employee engagement space and obviously have scaled your own team over the last number of years, I'm really intrigued and interested to know, what would be your top 3 tips for creating a really good employee culture in a startup and scaling business?
So my own experience is a bit unique because I've never worked anywhere else. So I always wanted to have an environment that was very open, very authentic. I wanted it to be a place of work where people felt that they could be their whole. I sometimes get quite taken back when I hear of different cultures where people feel that they're not listened to or heard. And I feel that being a founder is an incredible experience, but the team had to be better than you in many ways. And I think it's really important as a founder to put up your hand and say, here's what I'm really good at, but actually here's what I'm not really good at. And that's really, really important. So for me, your team is extremely important. So we came together and we've got values in Talivest that we really do live by kind of on a weekly, monthly basis. So the 3 values that I really think are important for when you think about that culture is, for the first one that we live by is together is better. So that really means that we celebrate successes and failures, but we're together as a team, and we encourage people to come with ideas, create an atmosphere where they're heard. Everybody's a part of that founding business at those different stages, and that's really important, particularly when you're attracting talent, is to make people feel like that. The second piece is to have courage. And I was really taken back when we started hiring earlier that, again, you could have the most incredible ideas from your team, but again, they don't have the courage to actually step forward and say, do you know what, we were doing this and I don't think it's working out very well. So making sure you set them up for success to make sure that they can tell you when things are going right, but more importantly, when things are going wrong. And then the third one is be inventors. So again, if you're not adapting and creating, you're falling behind your competitors. So for instance, in our situation, COVID was a really tough year for a lot of companies. We were quite lucky that our software was actually very well positioned, but we created a brand new product based off COVID, and we got ahead of our competitors because we could move that bit faster. So we have to be innovating in order to be that 2 steps ahead. So encourage that innovation within your team, no matter if you're a company size of 2, 20, 50, whatever the case is. You have to be thinking the whole time of where you are now, but where you need to be in a couple of months or years' time.
No, it's fantastic advice, Jayne. We talked about it on the launch of the She Generate and the program, the importance of your team being that central source of truth for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they have to be in a position to be able to share that information with you as the founder and the executive team within the business. And if you were to start again, Jayne, and what would be the piece of advice that you wished you knew before starting?
Hindsight's a great thing, and it's also a dangerous mindset, because again, I'm a big believer that everything happens for a reason. I think when I think back to my first round of funding, and we got quite lucky, because my first check was it happened without me even realizing. I asked for advice and I got an investment opportunity from it, which was great. But that gave me, unfortunately, that mindset early on of, well, sure, this can't be that difficult. And God, how wrong was I? For every, 20 meetings you're doing, you're getting like 19 no's, and you're maybe getting the one occasional maybe. And what I wish I knew back then, which I now would know now, is don't take no's personally. Every single company has gotten a no in their lifestyle. It is the most normal thing. What makes a founder stand out is the resilience. It is understanding why you got a no. I met one of our biggest investors in 3 different countries over 14 months until I got a yes. And every time I got a no, I asked why. I incorporated it into the roadmap or my own lanes. I came back and said, well, you said this was the problem. I've now fixed it. Will you now invest? So sometimes when you get a no, that can be the very start of a yes. So that's definitely one lesson I learned. The second piece is get people that are smart around you and don't hire friends. This is just a personal experience. It's very tempting at the beginning. Sometimes it works. In other situations, in my situation, it didn't work because you feel that you don't have that relationship where you can actually work together. It's very, very different. And then thirdly, and I think particularly for women, think big. There's enough people out there that are going to call you, mad and ludicrous. What are you doing? You're leaving a safe job, whatever it is. Or be ambitious. There's nothing wrong with saying, I want to create $1 billion company, or I want to be the next Apple, or whatever that is to you. But have confidence doing it. And as women, unfortunately, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult, particularly in investor meetings. It's hard to relate to the person who we're trying to pitch, because usually 9 times out of 10 they're a male. But just own the situation, be confident in your ability, and celebrate the wins. That's something that a lot of us don't tend to do. Getting your first customer, getting your first check, getting your first employee. Make sure to celebrate those things, because we're very quick to get down and disappointed, and those lows are very difficult. But when you get a high, make sure you really do celebrate it.
Yeah, fantastic. And Jayne, we've 1 minute before we go back into the break, or go into our first breakout room, but I'm really keen in terms of, obviously you've recently secured significant funding, and congratulations to you and the team on that, and we wish you continued success and growth as you continue to go through 2022. But lots of our businesses are at the funding stage, and lots of them are very early and working through that journey that they will become looking to raise finance. But if you could quickly give us your top 3 tips on fundraising, that would be great.
Sure. So I think tip number 1 is start off as you mean to end. What I mean by that is 2 kind of points put into one. Understand what you need funding for. So are you trying to fund to scale your company? Are you funding because you want to build a team? You need to understand what your exit strategy is. This may change, but if you're sitting in front of an investor and if they're giving you a check, in their head, they're thinking about, how can I get a 10x back from this? So understand why you need the funding before you go out and get it. That's really, really important. The second piece is that, again, I was very fortunate that I got good investors on from day one. Think of your early investors as an extension of your team. So they're going to be representing you. They're going to be doing introductions. They're taking the risk. So they know that it's not going to be perfect. So don't be afraid when you get your first investment as well to tell them that when things aren't going good. That's completely normal. But just remember that don't take easy money. And if you don't feel good about an investor, don't take it, because they could make or break you in the early stages. So really important to do your due diligence on your early investors. Getting investment is not easy. And anybody that will tell you that is really not being truthful. As I said earlier, it's not meant to be. Think about it as an exercise, that it's good to take as many meetings as you can and learn from all the times that you say no. But remember to research the investors that you're doing, because you don't want to waste your time and you don't want to waste their time. So there's no point talking to an investor if they only invest in, like food industries and you're in technology. So do make sure to do that. And warm introductions are really important. Now, saying that, my first investor, I didn't get any introductions. He was one of the head guys in Google. I just bombarded him on LinkedIn until I got a meeting. So don't be afraid as well to hustle a little bit. and to stand out. Tell somebody why you're passionate about your idea. Most importantly, tell them why you want their capital, because it's not just about their capital, it could be about the network they could bring or their experience. So think a little bit outside of the box, and also make sure that the deal you have with your first investment won't upset your next round. So don't go in with a crazy valuation. Don't undervalue yourself. Make sure that you set yourself up for success with that and that you understand the deal you're getting into. A lot of founders will raise money at the very beginning and they actually don't really understand what they're giving away. And if anybody comes to you to say, I want to advise the company, but I want equity, I'd be very wary of that as well, because that seems to be something that's cropping up quite a bit. So you have to remember to value yourself and your company.
Super. Jayne, thank you so much. We'll have a few more questions when we come back to the Q&A later, but thank you so much for that really great advice. I'm sure there's many of our founders on the call tonight that will welcome that sage and sound advice. I'm delighted now to move across to Aoife. Thank you, Jayne, for such great advice. But I would like to introduce you to Aoife. As I said, I met Aoife back in 2012. I've just asked her how old her children are, so I'm feeling incredibly old this evening. But I'm delighted to welcome Aoife with us tonight. Aoife has a BSc in physiotherapy, an MSc in sports medicine, is a chartered physiotherapist and founder of Salaso Health Solutions. She has over 20 years experience in the treatment and management and rehabilitation services across a range of clinical areas. Her professional interests center around patient empowerment and engaging patients with therapeutic exercise and physical activity programs. In 2011, she established Salaso Health, a digital health company developing online, mobile, and telehealth solutions to pioneer precision exercise for healthier lives. Salaso enables healthcare providers to embed exercise prescriptions and physical activity programs as a core pillar of their care plan. And based in Kerry, in the Kerry Technology Park, Salaso platforms are serving customers in healthcare and employee wellness industries across Ireland, the UK, and the US markets. And Aoife is shortlisted this year for the National Health Technology Innovation Award for 2021. So I'm delighted, Aoife, to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Denise, and lovely to be here.
So I'm going to jump straight in, as I did with Jayne, because we've got some really interesting questions to pose to you tonight in relation to your founding journey and some of the growing pains. So I'm really interested, Aoife, because when we met, you were exploring a number of accelerator programs, and I know that you embarked on a couple, and I know some of our community are considering accelerator programs, and some of our She Generate community members are with us tonight for the AwakenHub accelerator light program. So I was just keen and curious to understand, can you tell us about your experience with accelerators and what were your main driving factors?
I suppose the main driving factors really were, my background was I'm a physiotherapist, as you said. I had worked in clinical practice, but I had no clue about business or setting up a business or how you developed a business, how you got things going, and so on. So really, that was the driver for, how do I bring this idea to life? How do I make it happen? How do I, try and achieve the vision that I had for the business. So that was the driver for applying for the accelerator program. So I did 2 different accelerator programs, and there were 2 completely different experiences. Pluses and minuses for both. The first one I did was back in 2011 based at the Kerry Technology Park in Tralee, actually. So it was very, very handy, actually. And it was the Endeavour program. I don't know if anybody has heard of it. It ran for a number of years. It was supported by a local entrepreneur in Kerry, Jayne Ronayne. Some of you may have heard of Jerry. He's quite a successful entrepreneur and has a business now called tweak.com. But Jerry's one of these people that gives a lot back to the community, and he supported an accelerator program for people who wanted to set up their own businesses. So there were 13 businesses that applied to that accelerator program. It was also supported by the Institute of Technology in Tralee and by Shannon Development, and I'm not sure if Enterprise Ireland had something to do with it as well. And I think Kerry Group, one of the businesses in the area, were also sponsors of the program. So that was a fantastic opportunity for me and for the other companies that were actually participants on that program. There were 13 of us that participated in the accelerator program. And what was great about it was it gave us an opportunity to link in and to speak with experienced entrepreneurs. And for me, that was probably the most valuable thing about the accelerator program. And I would say to anybody looking at an accelerator program, look at who's running it. Look at who are you going to get access to as part of the program, and what are you going to learn from it? Because the best learning is not going to be from the books, not going to be from the talks and so on. It's from the people who have been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, who've built their businesses. They're not there because they want the money from the talk or the webinar or the whatever. They're there because they want to help you get up those first couple of steps of the ladder. Mm. Because any CEO who's built a successful business knows what it's like and knows the hard graft that's involved, and that's where you get your best advice. So that was the accelerator program in Kerry, and I must say, Salaso would not be here today without what we learned on that program.
It's amazing. It's that whole conversation around role models, and you can't be what you can't see, and obviously learning from experienced entrepreneurs who've paved the way for you beforehand, and you get to understand their warts and all in terms of their journey, and learn from their mistakes and their successes as well.
That's it. And it was advice, and she got investment, but actually, having the I suppose if you like the smarts to ask for advice when you need it. And it's funny, I remember getting a tip way back in the very early stages. Sometimes asking somebody who seems to be way up there and way very inaccessible or whatever, wouldn't potentially have time to talk to somebody in the very early stages and so on. I remember somebody saying to me once, ask them if they could meet you for lunch, because everybody needs to eat and nobody ever refuses a free lunch. So rather than asking them for a meeting or asking them, have they half an hour to meet you and give you some advice on your business and so on, ask them, can you take them to lunch, and in the process get a little bit of advice about a problem you have or a way you want to bring your business and so on. And that, I must say, is great advice that stood me in great stead over the years,
Bob, I love that. Everybody has to eat, right?
Everyone has to eat at some stage. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So, back to the second accelerator then, just to finish out on the question you asked me, Denise, was an accelerator called Helpbox I did in London. I think this is where I bumped into yourself, probably over in the London area. But so Helpbox was a very different accelerator. Helpbox was run by Sandbox Industries in the States. They brought their healthcare focused accelerator to Europe only once ever, and that was in 2013. It ran in London. We were lucky enough to be one of 7 companies that were chosen to participate in that. And I found that a very different experience. You didn't have the access to the seasoned entrepreneurs that you had through the Kerry program. You didn't, and maybe this is something about Ireland and the way we're willing to help each other, and the way we're willing to give a bit more back, and the way we want to help people get if you're Irish, we try and push you up the ladder a little bit. But in Helpbox, it was a lot more, I suppose the companies were more out for themselves a little bit as well, I found, and it was just a very different experience. There were some really good people that had consultancy advice and so on that program, but from my perspective, I probably learned an awful lot more on the Endeavour program, and I would say I did that because it was experienced entrepreneurs who were there just literally giving you advice, it wasn't in any way structured. It was literally, don't make these 3 mistakes that I made. And, that was hugely valuable.
Absolutely. And Aoife, as I mentioned to Jayne, and a big question that a lot of people ask, and we talked about the pivot, and one of the big changes that you made in your journey at the early stages when we met initially was your brand. Obviously, I met you as the CEO and founder of Sports Clinic Plus. and now we are in the Salaso. So can you just give us a little bit of a background in terms of the brand, what drove you to change it, what stage was the business at, and kind of the motivators and drivers and what it really has meant for the business overall?
Yeah, sure. So what it has meant is it has opened a much larger market opportunity for us. So again, sports is a very niche area. Sports therapy, sports rehab, even particularly at the elite level, it's very, very niche, and it's very, very small as a market opportunity. What happened to us was, I was coming from a sports background. I have a master's in sports medicine. I would have worked actually with the Kerry football team for a number of years and with a number of other sports teams and so on. So I had a huge interest in sports, and probably started the business with that sort of focus on supporting sports people to engage with exercise and rehabilitation requirements and so on. But as we developed the business, and when we brought the first product to market in 2013, physiotherapists started using it for their sports players. But then they were coming back to us and saying, you know what, this is just as relevant for my elderly patient who's had a hip replacement, or for the older patient who's had a back problem, and so on. So the platform and the product was relevant to many, many different clients of theirs, if you like. But the sports tag didn't fit. So somebody who's had a hip replacement, or someone maybe who's had a stroke, couldn't really relate to, or it wasn't something, that was that seemed to be set up for them. So that was really the driver for changing the name of the business. And we wanted, and the other thing was, we were starting to see the opportunity in employee wellness and employee well-being. So we didn't want to have a name that could be just in one area. So, we didn't want to link it too much to clinical or healthcare, because we saw that over time the opportunity would expand into other areas. So we chose a name that's Salaso actually stands for a combination of salud, being the Spanish for fit and healthy. And we wanted something that was global facing and not just, for Ireland. We felt having a Spanish Spanish in the title or in the name would help give that impression. And then Iaso is the Greek goddess of return to healing and recuperation. So that's where we came up with the name. But that was the driver really to enable us to serve, I guess, a greater market than what was associated with that with that sports name.
And with a much wider client base and potential, obviously, then as well, from that perspective. Yeah, fascinating. Aoife, hiring your first team members as you were going along the journey, obviously there's a lot of our founders at that stage of considering whether it would be just an internship coming in for the summer, or somebody that would join them at the first stage of their commercial development or their marketing. What have you, hiring your first team members, can you give us a view of some of the challenges and some of the successes you faced as you went through that process?
I said we'd be here all night, actually, Denise, but if there was one thing I have learned probably in terms of hiring and in terms of, as we build a team, and we have a great team at Salaso, we pride ourselves on being very together as a team. We enjoy working together. Jayne talked earlier about the values in their company. We have very strong, a very strong emphasis on values, and teamwork is very definitely one of our values. And I think, probably being very clear on, your values, your vision, your mission, and your purpose, and being able to articulate those clearly in your materials, but also in an interview is really, really important. And for me, when I'm interviewing now, I'm thinking to, our values, the way we work together, the way we want our company represented. And does this person that I'm interviewing, represent those values? And even if they have the best skill set and the most important skill that we need, for me, it's more important that they fit with our values at this stage, and that they fit with our culture as a company. Because, it's probably one of the mistakes we've made in the past is we've hired people more for their skills rather than their value sets. And then you find they just don't fit, or they don't work with our culture and so on. So being very cognizant of the individual as a whole and how they, you know, the values they represent, and teasing those out at interview. That for me is probably the most important thing. You can always upskill somebody, you can always train somebody up if they're missing the skills, but you can, you know, I believe it's very difficult to change value sets and behaviors and so on. And I think that's really the key to successful hiring.
Yeah. And Aoife, you've come from changing your own personal career, from sports medicine and being a physiotherapist to a startup founder with, you know, for a tech business. Have you had your leadership style or learned more skills yourself as you've gone along?
Absolutely. Made an awful lot of mistakes, Denise. You know, I'm the first person to hold the hand up and say, you know, and probably in the early stages, you know, I nearly shied away from sort of business books around leadership and so on, because I didn't see myself in that sort of space at all. And at my core, I still see myself as a physiotherapist, you know, and I'm passionate about physiotherapy, and, you know, everything we do at Salaso is very much, you know, born out of that sort of, you know, what my background is in physiotherapy. But absolutely, as you're building the team, and, you know, I had a wake up moment. I remember I had a mentor in New York for a while, and I met him over dinner, going back a couple of years. And I remember he asked me, we were over dinner, and he was just asking me about the business, and he actually took the menu card and flipped it over and made me write down where was I spending my time, literally on the back of the card. Just write down for me, what are you doing with your time? What percentage is going on sales? What percentage is going on, you know, the admin? What percentage is going on whatever? And I always remember he flipped it over and he looked at it and he said, he said, in my view, you know, a significantly greater percentage of your time should be spent on building your team. Because if you want to scale this business, your team is everything, and you need to build the A team, and you need to work on how you manage that build, and how you, I suppose, how you support people to grow, but equally how you grow yourself in terms of leadership in order to lead that team, because it's you that will attract good people to the team, and it's you that will help them to get the best out of themselves. And that was a real game-changing moment for me, and that it was the first time I actually thought about that, you know, it is important to invest in your own time and invest time in yourself as a leader, in order to support your team in growing further as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And Aoife, I have one more quick question before we go back into the breakout rooms. What was the one piece of advice that you would give a new founder, or what's the one thing you wish you knew before starting?
I was thinking about this one actually, Denise, and I know you asked Jayne earlier your top 3 tips for funding and so on. But I suppose for me, you know, I think, you know, there's so much that I had to learn, you know, being a physiotherapist and, you know, starting a new business. There were so many things that I needed to learn. And, you know, funding was one, marketing. I'm not saying that I'm proficient in any of these at this stage, but you just have to literally learn and get on with it. But I suppose the one area that I think is key for every business is sales. You know, you don't have a business unless somebody's willing to pay money for what you're producing. And if there was one thing I wish I'd known more of, or more about earlier in the business life cycle, it's probably around solution selling and being more strategic in terms of, you know, the sales meetings. And really, when you go into a sales meeting, not necessarily doing the demo of your product straight away, or not even doing it in the first meeting at all, but actually approaching that whole sales process and understanding the needs of the customer, working with them to better understand their needs so that you can tee up for the demo better and hence move through the sales cycle faster. So I think, you know, I would love to have studied solution selling a bit more before I started the business. But you know what, we're learning it on the job a little bit.
Fantastic. So we're going to quickly go back into another breakout room, which will be about 10 minutes. And then we will come back to Aoife and Jayne and take some questions. I see them coming in thick and fast in the chat. So hopefully we'll get to some audience questions before we close at 6:50. Everybody. I hope you enjoyed the second breakout room and again got to meet some new people. Unfortunately, Jayne has had to step off the call. The journey of a female founder needing to take an urgent call from a client. So we're just going to work through some of the questions that have been posed for Aoife this evening. And any more from the chat, please do. We have captured what has come through already. So Aoife, one of the big questions that's been posed in the chat was the values element that you spoke about in terms of recruitment. How do you interview for values and how do you approach that?
So I suppose from our perspective, we have 5 very clear values for our company. And, you know, when I would be prepping for an interview, I'll ask, you know, questions around that will where the applicant sort of has to show examples of how they addressed certain challenges. And, you know, for example, you know, one of our values is fortitude, you know, because great fortitude, resilience is, as Jayne said earlier, really, really important when you're in a startup, and you're not going to get anywhere unless, you know, not just you as the founder, but your team need to have, you know, that ability to be resilient, because there will be ups and there will be downs, and, you know, there will be times when, you know, you all have to row together and put the shoulders to the wheel. And it's important that you have people that can, you know, dig deep when the, you know, when the chips are down. So usually it would be around, you know, give me an example of a time when you had to display, you know, resilience, or give me an example of a time when maybe a project you were working on, you know, didn't do so well or started to fail. What did you do then, and how did you approach it? So you would ask them for examples of, you know, times when they had to deal with certain challenges and so on. Or, you know, if it's teamwork, give me an example of a time when you worked on a project and teamwork was very important, and what was your part in that, and so on. So by sort of teasing out, you know, some examples, you get them to talk their language, and you get them to sort of really show you the authentic them. And authenticity is really, really important. And, you know, particularly when it comes to values, like people can tell you, oh, I'm a great team player, and, oh, yes, I have great fortitude. But, you know, you need to sort of, sometimes their impression of, or their understanding of what is needed in terms of grit, resilience and fortitude in a startup could be very, very different to the reality. So just teasing that out with them during the interview can be really important.
And Aoife, I'm sure a part of it is trusting your gut too, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, again, it goes back to, you know, try and see the authentic them during the interview. And, you know, and again, if you're not happy and, you know, if you're not sure after the first interview, what's wrong with doing a second interview, or what's wrong with getting somebody else to meet with them, and so on. Because building your team is so, so important. And being able to work well together as a team is really, really critical to the success of the business.
And one of the questions that I did get the opportunity to ask Jayne, and I would love to pose to you as well, Aoife, so many of our community will at some point be looking to do fundraise in terms of their scaling and the next stage of their business development. And could you give us your top 3 tips on fundraising and what you've learned on your journey?
Probably number 1, again, I'd go back to sales. So every investor wants to see that you have a product that people will pay for. And, you know, your sales plan, you know, if you're already, you know, if you're able to generate some revenue before you bring in the funds, or before you start looking at fundraising, I think that is huge. And even if that revenue is coming, you know, from people in your own network, or, you know, from our perspective, I started with my own network of physiotherapists whom I knew, and you literally have to go cap in hand to sort of see, will they support it? Will they pay for it? You know, everybody loves your product until you ask them to put their hand in the pocket and pay for it. But that is so, so important that you actually get that revenue coming in to validate that there is a value in what you're doing, because nobody wants to sort of give you the bad news, and nobody wants to tell you that actually what you have is not going to work, and so on. But you know, the proof is in the pudding. If they're willing to pay for it, then there's a value in it. And that's what you as the founder really need to tease out and find that out sooner rather than later. So funding tips, I would say, focus on the sales, and where can you get those early sales to show the value of what you're doing. Second thing I'd probably say is, you know, have some structure around the company. And, you know, one of the things we did early on with our first, when we got our first investment, was we started a structure of management meetings and board meetings. And even though the management meeting was only 2 people, we still got into that habit of having a good corporate structure and corporate governance. And then when at a future stage you're dealing with, you know, bigger investors and VCs and so on, and they're looking for, show us the last 12 months of board meetings, you have some, you know, paperwork there, the minutes of the board meetings, the agendas and so on. So immediately they have more comfort in investing in your business because you have a structure around the corporate governance. And again, they're the kind of things I suppose that the accelerator programs are really useful for in supporting you to learn that type of thing. And the other thing I would probably say is, you know, look outside the, you know, the traditional sort of funding streams. You know, people talk a lot about the VCs, and there's a lot of talk at the moment about the amount of VC money out there and so on. But there are other areas of funding. You know, we got our first funding through BES and EIIS funding through a network of family and friends. So, you know, again, many of our friends and family would be, you know, PAYE workers. They might be paying tax at the 41 or 42% tax rate. And again, they can do an EIIS investment where there's a tax relief for them, invest in the business. So the early stage investors in Salaso were mainly teachers and nurses, family and friends of mine and my husband's, who, you know, who believed in what we were trying to do. And again, that's another route for you to get funding without necessarily giving a lot of equity away. And the last thing I'd say there is the other area to explore is strategics. So we took investment in 2018 from one of our customers. So a strategic investment from a large integrated health system in the US. Been the best thing for our business because we now have a reference customer and an investor in the US, and the doors that they're able to open for us have been, you know, huge. So, you know, again, I'd be forever grateful to Michael Dowling and Northwell Health. But, you know, I would say to people on this call, look outside of the traditional routes to funding and see, are there other opportunities that would suit your business and that you might be able to leverage for your business.
Super. I have one last question for you, Aoife. Would you do it all again?
Absolutely. Why wouldn't I? We're still here. And again, you know, I said earlier, Denise, we're on a journey. You know, we're still here 10 years later. I met you back in 2012. The business started in 2011, but we still have a long way to go. We've a vision, you know, that we've set out for ourselves to achieve. We've a mission on how we want to achieve that. We're building the team. We're building, you know, a great product that we feel will bring huge benefit to patients and to employees, and engaging with, you know, precise exercise and exercise that will improve health and well-being. So, you know, from my perspective, you know, it's really interesting. We find over the last 6 to 12 months, you know, people are coming to us, you know, being interviewed for various positions and so on, and sometimes just applying for positions with our business, because people are searching for a purpose in life, particularly after COVID. I think people are searching for, you know, I think during COVID, we've realized how fragile we all are, and how, you know, how fragile life is as well. And you want to spend your time doing something that you really, really love. And you won't be, you know, I find that over the last 6 months, people are coming and saying, you know, Salaso has a company, is a company with a purpose, a company with a mission and a vision that speaks to a lot of people. And I suppose for me personally, it speaks a lot to me, obviously. You know, I started it, but I think for anyone out there, I would say, you know, if you can find, you know, if you can work on something that you enjoy doing, and you believe in what you're doing, and you believe in the vision of where you're going, you know, it's a worthwhile exercise to be involved in. And, you know, what else would you be doing with your time, in one sense?
Yeah.
And it's great to be able to spend it doing something that you really love.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Aoife, so much for joining us tonight. And thank you to Jayne, who unfortunately had just had to drop off for an urgent call. Great advice, great tips. Obviously, we've recorded the session, so it will be available again to those who would like to re-listen and hear some more of the insight again. I'm going to pass you back to Mary Carthy just to do our roundup and our wrap. Thank you all for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all again at the next event.
Thanks, Denise. Thank you.
That was amazing, wasn't it? It was yet again the fastest hour of the whole month. Thank you to Jayne, thank you to Aoife, thank you so much to Denise for the wonderful questions, and everyone for their participation tonight. It was just hopping. You could feel the energy of that screen. It was burning up. So thank you all. I'd like to bring your attention our Christmas jollies. Now, you all have to bring your singing voices, because do you remember last year? Bunch of cats, but it was great crack. So on the 14th of December, bring your party hats, make them yourself, do what you want, come along, have a little bit of crack with us to celebrate the year and close it out. And I suppose, as Jayne said earlier, celebrate the win, celebrate that we're together and we're here and we've helped each other this year, and we've heard from the most inspiring people this whole year. Thank you for joining us. We're going to finish on time and see you all very, very soon, and keep the conversation going. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.